From Emmett Till to Count of Monte Cristo, and of course, let's not forget those creepy Topsy Bopsy characters, Season 1 of Lovecraft Country was jam-packed with some clever and interesting Easter eggs, which I have covered in my weekly breakdown. But let's take a look at my top 20 of the season, and let me know if you agree in the comments below. But first, a quick shout out to all my subscribers who've enjoyed the season as much as I have, and hello and welcome if you are new. My name is Opinionated Livia and I basically talk a lot about whatever I want. If you enjoy what I have to say, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Now let the countdown begin. Number 20, Candyman, Episode 5. There was a moment in episode 5 when Montrose visits his secret lover Sammy, and Montrose travels to Cabrini Green where Sammy lives. This is a direct nod to the 1992 movie Candyman. Episode 5 is all about legacy of blackness and identity in horrors. And what's a better movie to reference than Candyman, which looks at racial politics through the lens of horror? Candyman was actually filmed in Chicago's Cabrini Green housing project. Similarly to Montrose's character trope, Tony Todd's character in Candyman was a product of self-hatred and injustice, and both had loves that wasn't accepted by society. Jordan Peele, who executively produced Lovecraft Country, also wrote the up-and-coming Candyman, which will be released next year. Number 19, Beyonce, Episode 7. Episode 7 honours famous women of colour and included an Easter egg for one of America's most famous women, Beyonce. We saw Hippolyta glide through her fantastical multiverse trip, where she encountered a mysterious alien woman. This character was credited as Beyonce. If you say it quickly, it sounds like Beyonce. So episode 7 was all about Hippolyta finding herself and naming herself. Say in French means it is. She's taken herself beyond it is. Basically, she is more than it is. It was a nice play on words. Number 18, Realist, Episode 3. When Atticus follows Christina, we see them go to the office of black realist Jerome J. Jackson. This is important because in the 1950s, black people were not allowed to become certified realists. Instead, they had to become estate realists. Here, Lovecraft Country is depicting the racial inequalities during the 1950s. When Letty bought the Winthorpe house, it would have been very hard for a black woman to purchase a home in a white neighbourhood, so the use of Jerome was a nice touch. Number 17, Denmark Vessey, Episode 1. Atticus goes to find out information about his missing father, and we see him enter a bar called Denmark Vessey's Bar. Denmark Vessey was a real person who bought his freedom for $600 and was planning a slave rebellion, but he was caught and executed in 1822. I think that was just a nice little historical reference there. Number 16, Gordon Park's Photography, Episode 1. While Uncle G, Letty and Atticus travelled across the country to reach Arden, we saw a montage of different scenes depicting the Jim Crow era. Some of the imagery was straight from Gordon Park's critically acclaimed segregation study series. We saw a well-dressed black woman and a little girl. This was taken by Parks in 1956. We also saw a black man with his 2 children who were being ignored by the ice cream server, which was another recreation of one of Park's famous photos, and a poster which read, "There's no way like the American way." This was a perfect replication of the 1937 photo taken by Margaret Brock White. Episode 1 was all about the racial disparities in America. This was confirmed by the use of the 1965 debate between James Baldwin and William F. Buckley. James Baldwin famously argued that the American dream was at the expense of black Americans. This was the running theme throughout Lovecraft Country. Number 15, Count of Monte Cristo, Episode 2. We first saw the book written by Alexandra Dumas in Episode 1 when Atticus was looking at it. But when Montrose is digging an escape tunnel, Uncle G mentions that it was Montrose's favourite book. The key plot follows a character who digs a tunnel to escape prison. See the similarities here? The shot also resembled Shawshank Redemption. Number 14, The Green Book, Episode 1. The book that Uncle G and Hippolyta published in Episode 1 was inspired by the real-life Negro Motorist Green Book, published from 1936 to 1966 by postal employee Victor Green. It provided black Americans with advice on safe places to visit while they travelled across America during the Jim Crow era. Let's just say the monsters were the least of our heroes' worries. Number 13, Hiram Epstein, Episode 3. When Letty was investigating, she discovered that Hiram Epstein experimented on black people who eventually became the ghosts of her house. His character was referenced to Berthold Epstein, a Jewish doctor who was forcibly conscripted as an assistant to Dr. Mangel, nicknamed the Doctor of Death. In Auschwitz concentration camp, they would experiment on prisoners and even children. Epstein had once said he was haunted by the ghosts of those he had killed. Episode 3 was all about who was the real horrors, and I think I'd rather see a ghost. Number 12, Josephine Co, Episode 7. As mentioned, Episode 7 paid homage to iconic women of colour. We had the appearance of entertainer and dancer Josephine Baker, a black American who took Paris by storm. She worked as a spy for the French resistance during World War II. And did you also spot Frida Kahlo? We got a speech from the Mexican artist, and she also smooched Josephine. The two had famously dated. We also saw motorcyclist Queen of Miami, Vessey Stringfield, who rode solo across the USA. She also worked as a dispatch rider for the US Armed Forces. All women were self-assured and had a purpose, a reminder to Hippolyta that there was more to life than being a 1950s housewife. Number 11, Lovecraft Country Book, Episode 8. As we know, the series was based on a novel of the same name written by Matt Ruff, but when Atticus travels to the future, the novel was written by his son, George Friedman. The series and novel were influenced by the works of horror author H.P. Lovecraft. The series uses George Friedman to reappropriate H.P. Lovecraft's notoriously racist creation. This was Lovecraft Country flipping many horror tropes on its head. We are now halfway through, and if you are still listening and haven't subscribed yet, go and hit that button because I will be doing a few more Lovecraft Country videos. Number 10, Tit Snake, Episode 2. During Letty's hallucination, Tit revealed his big old snake in his pants. This was a biblical reference to the fall of Adam and Eve. Confirmed by the artwork we earlier saw in Sam's house, many believe that Eve lusted wisdom and gave into temptation with the apple from the tree of knowledge. She encouraged Adam to do the same, goaded by Satan in the form of a snake. As a result, they were both exiled from the Garden of Eden. The snake attacks Letty, and it is a reminder of misogyny in society. Throughout the series, we saw how men, especially white men, were held at a higher esteem, whereas women were powerless. No wonder Christina wanted to be a man. Number 9, Human Zoo, Episode 2. In episode Whitey's on the Moon, we saw our heroes become part of the pre-dinner entertainment, taunted by their hallucinations. As the White Lodge members looked on, this was the 1950s version of a human zoo. Colonized people were kept in cages and gawked at by white people. Many were from Africa and put on display alongside animals. King Leopold of Belgium, probably one of the worst humans that ever walked the earth, was notorious for his zoo, where he kept 267 Congolese people imprisoned and humiliated. Episode 2 was all about racial oppression, and what's worse than a human zoo? Number 8, Trumbull Park, Episode 3. Holy Ghost showed brave Letty pioneering and buying a house in an all-white neighbourhood, where she was met with hostility and harassment, and Ruby referenced Trumbull Park. This was a housing project in Chicago and became a site for racial violence towards a black family who moved in. Black residents couldn't walk the streets without police protection, and it wasn't until 1963 when black people could go to the neighbourhood without police protection. Episode 3 was all about the monster of racism and how it victimised black people, depicted through Letty's pioneering. Number 7, Hippolyta and Diana's names. Princess Diana, known as Wonder Woman, was a goddess, and her mother Hippolyta was the queen of the Amazon in Greek mythology and comic superheroes. And in Lovecraft Country, I don't think the name choices were a coincidence, seeing how Hippolyta and Dee now both have superpowers. Number 6, Jackie Robinson, Episode 1. Tit had a dream which included the famous baseball player Jackie Robinson, who rescued him by beating a monster with a baseball bat. And we heard a monologue taken from the biopic The Jackie Robinson Story. Not only did this set us up nicely for Tit's journey throughout the series, but it also foreshadowed Tit saving his dad in Episode 9. This was a nice touch where dream met reality, bringing everything full circle. Now, are you ready for the top 5? Here we go. Number 5, Topsy Bopsy, Episode 8. Lovecraft Country put racism against black children at the forefront in episode Jiggabobo, as well as the unheard black girl trope. We saw the death of young Emmett Till and how Dee was ignored and taunted throughout the episode. We saw the appearance of the anti-slavery novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1852. The novel helped kickstart the Civil War and included the minor character Topsy, but over time the Topsy character was appropriated by white people. Her features were emphasised and she spoke in broken English. She was used as a tool to mock and ridicule black girls. Episode 8 was all about the dehumanization of black girls and how their struggles often goes ignored by society. This was emphasized by the use of Naomi Wadler's speech at the March for Our Lives protest. The character was a reminder to Dee of how the world viewed her, which made the Topsy Bopsies even more terrifying. Number 4, the use of music. Throughout this series, we heard music from multiple genres and eras. All song choices have been carefully selected to portray a theme or serve a greater meaning. An example of this is in episode 5, when Ruby dances to the song Tutti Frutti while in the form of a white woman. Tutti Frutti was originally by black artist Little Richard, but the version by Pat Boone was more successful in the 1950s, because Pat was white and his version was deemed safer. As a result, it charted higher. This song choice clearly highlights the narrative for white privilege. Ruby witnessed firsthand a privilege that she had never experienced before. Number 3, Rebirth Imagery, Episode 10. During Christina's immortality ritual, we saw Atticus die. His position on the cross mimicked Jesus when he sacrificed himself to save mankind. Many believe that this is a massive hint and Atticus will be reborn, just like Jesus returned 3 days after his sacrifice. And there was another rebirth symbolism, when we saw Atticus meet his mother in the ancestral plane, and they were completely surrounded by fire. This represents the mythological phoenix bird that comes back to life after it dies. Let's just say don't be surprised if Atticus makes an appearance next season. Number 2, Tulsa Massacre, Episode 9. When Atticus, Letty and Montrose travelled to the past to retrieve the Book of Names, we were thrown into Tulsa a few hours before the race riots occurred. And throughout the series, the Tulsa Massacre has been a running theme. We saw how Monte suffered from PTSD, and even the smell of fire triggered his memory of the traumatic events. Rewind 1921 had several Easter eggs relating to Tulsa. There was a Dreamland Theatre, which was a real-life landmark in Greenwood District, which showed silent films. The Greenwood District was also known as the Black Wall Street, and it was heavily targeted by white rioters. It was a place for wealthy black Americans, a very affluent area. Many believe that the white rioters acted out of jealousy. The trio also teleported into the real-life luxurious Stratford Hotel, which was owned by J.B. Stratford. He was the richest black man on Black Wall Street in 1921. Both the hotel and movie theatre were completely destroyed during the riot. Lovecraft Country portrayed the planes bombing the downtown area, and although the city officials claimed the planes were purely there for surveillance, multiple eyewitnesses reported seeing the planes circling overhead and firing down on the buildings below. This ranks at number 2 because the Tulsa Massacre has always been downplayed and misreported in the media and history. It was recorded that there were only 36 deaths, however, there was closer to over 300. So Lovecraft Country did an amazing job tackling the national trauma and depicting a real life event. Are you ready for number 1? Of course, it's Emmett Till. We were first introduced to Emmett Till in episode 3, Holy Ghost. He asked the Ouija board if he'll have a good time on his trip, but the Ouija board said no. The real-life Emmett Till took a trip to Mississippi in 1955, where he was lynched. His murderers were acquitted for the crime, and no one served any time, even though his murderers later admitted to it. This was a massive injustice and rippled through the black community. Emmett Till was an anchor throughout the first season of Lovecraft Country, and his death affected all of our main characters, from Letty, Atticus, Dee, Ruby, and even Christina in her own weird way. We witnessed a recreation of his funeral in a Jigabobo episode, which explored racism towards black children. Lovecraft Country committed itself on portraying horror and violence, and his story was more horrifying and terrifying than any of the made-up plots in the series, and also more than any of the monsters or ghosts we ever saw. It was used to remind us that, although his story was traumatic for the black community, resilience did come from it. The black community turned the pain into power, pretty much like the theses for Lovecraft Country.